The phone rang, shattering the silence of Harry's Tuesday evening. It was Tom, his voice booming with excitement. "Harry, old pal, I'm having a party this Saturday. You have to come." Tom had inherited his eccentric Uncle Howard's mansion. He was finally throwing a party to celebrate. Harry hesitated. He had been swamped with work, but Tom's enthusiasm was infectious. "All right," Harry conceded, "I'll be there. Saturday couldn't come soon enough." Harry felt a much-needed wave of excitement. He hadn't been to a real party in months. Work had consumed him. His wife, Karen, had even commented on his distant demeanor. Maybe this party was what he needed, a chance to relax, reconnect with old friends. He picked out a shirt, a rare moment of vanity in his otherwise routine life. As he drove, the city lights gave way to darkened roads. Blackwood Manor was on the outskirts of town. Harry had never been, but he'd heard the whispers. Uncle Howard had been a recluse, obsessed with the occult. Some even claimed he'd been involved in dark rituals. Harry brushed off the thoughts. Just silly rumors. He was looking forward to a night of fun, not ghost stories. He pulled up to the mansion gates. The wrought iron was twisted into menacing shapes. Gargoyles perched atop the stone pillars, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight. He could hear the faint pulse of music, laughter. He took a deep breath and drove through the gates. The party was waiting. Blackwood Manor loomed before him. It was more imposing than Harry had imagined. The windows were dark eyes, reflecting the moon's pale light. Ivy crawled up the walls like grasping hands. He parked his car amongst a dozen others. The air throbbed with music, a strange blend of modern pop and something older, with an unsettling rhythm. He made his way up the steps to the front door. The heavy oak creaked open before he could knock. A woman with fiery red hair and a knowing smile ushered him inside. "You must be Harry. Tom's been expecting you." The foyer was a whirlwind of activity. People danced beneath a massive crystal chandelier, its light fractured into 1,000 dancing shadows. Harry felt a pang of unease. The music seemed louder inside, the air thick with the scent of perfume and something vaguely metallic. He pushed through the crowd, searching for a familiar face. He spotted Tom by the grand staircase, his laughter booming above the music. "Harry, you made it!" Tom clapped him on the back, nearly knocking him off his feet. "Place is amazing, Tom!" Harry shouted over the music. "Bit creepy, though. You sure about this place?" Tom just laughed, pouring him a drink. "Don't tell me you're scared, old man. It's all in good fun." Besides, he leaned in close, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "They say the spirits here are friendly." Harry took a large gulp of his drink. The alcohol did little to calm his nerves. Something felt off. The laughter seemed a little too loud, the smiles a little too wide. He glanced around the room. The dancing figures seemed to contort in the flickering candlelight. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision. He excused himself and wandered down a hallway, seeking a moment of quiet. The air here was heavy, stagnant. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes following him as he walked. He stopped before a massive oak door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of pale light spilling out into the hallway. He could hear hushed voices. Curiosity piqued. He pushed the door open. The room was small and dusty. A single flickering candle illuminated a group of people huddled around a table. In the center of the table lay a wijja board. The planchette moved slowly across the board, guided by the trembling fingers of the participants. Harry recognized the woman with the red hair. She looked up at him, her eyes gleaming with an unnerving intensity. "Care to join us?" she purred. "We're just getting started." Harry hesitated at the doorway, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. He'd always been skeptical of the supernatural. Ouija boards were just harmless fun, right? A way to spook yourself and your friends on a dark night. But something about the atmosphere in this room, the intensity in the woman's eyes, sent a shiver down his spine. "Come on, Harry," Tom's voice boomed from behind him. "Don't tell me you're too chicken to play." Tom clapped him on the back, propelling him into the room. The others chuckled, their faces a mixture of amusement and something else, anticipation or something darker. He took a hesitant step towards the table, each creak of the floorboards sounding unnaturally loud in the silence that had fallen over the room. He recognized some of the faces around the table. There was Sarah, a bubbly blonde he'd often seen chatting with Tom at college parties, and Mark, a quiet guy from his English literature class, his eyes unusually bright in the dim light. The woman with the red hair smiled at him again, her teeth gleaming like polished ivory. "Come on, Harry, take a seat. We're waiting for you." Harry reluctantly pulled up a chair and joined the circle. The air felt heavy, charged with a strange energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He placed his fingers tentatively on the planchette, its smooth, cool surface sending a jolt through him. The others followed suit, their fingers forming a circle around his. The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by the faint crackling of the candle flame. "Is anyone there?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Harry felt a wave of disappointment mixed with relief. Maybe this was all a big joke after all. He started to pull his fingers away, but the woman with the red hair stopped him. "Give it time," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the board. "Sometimes they like to make us wait." And then it moved. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, the planchette began to glide across the board, dragging their fingers with it. Harry's breath caught in his throat. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself it was just someone pushing the planchette as a prank. But the pressure against his fingers felt different, unearthly. The planchette picked up speed, moving with increasing confidence across the board, pausing briefly on different letters. E-E-S. The word seemed to reverberate in the silence of the room, sending chills down Harry's spine. He wanted to pull away, to run from the room, but an unseen force seemed to hold him captive. He was both terrified and strangely exhilarated. "Who are you?" Mark's voice was barely audible, tinged with a fear that mirrored Harry's own. The planchette paused for a moment as if considering its answer. Then, with a suddenness that made everyone gasp, it shot across the board, spelling out a single word. Z. A cold dread washed over Harry. The name hung in the air, heavy and ominous. He'd heard the name before, whispered in hushed tones in his grandmother's stories. Azazel, the demon of the desert, the bringer of chaos. He tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, but deep down, a primal fear told him this was no game. This was something real, something dangerous. The others stared at the board, their faces pale and drawn. Sarah's hand trembled, her eyes wide with terror. Mark had gone completely white, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Even Tom, who had been so eager to play, seemed to have sobered up, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a nervous tension. The candle flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the room. The air grew colder, as if a window had been thrown open to a winter storm. A low growl seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a sound that sent shivers down Harry's spine. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his throat constricting with fear. "What do you want?" the woman with the red hair asked, her voice surprisingly steady, but even she couldn't hide the tremor in her hand as she reached out to touch the planchette. The planchette remained motionless, as if daring them to continue. And then slowly it began to move again, its message chillingly clear. "Yea." The mansion, once alive with music and laughter, now felt oppressive, suffocating. Harry couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching his every move. He made his excuses and left, the name Azazel echoing in his mind. The drive home was a blur. He couldn't recall the route, the feel of the steering wheel in his hands. He was running on autopilot, fueled by a growing sense of dread. He tried to tell himself it was all a prank, a silly game gone wrong. But the name, the chilling presence in that room, lingered in his mind like a bad taste. He couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside his window sent a jolt of fear through him. He saw shadows move in the corners of his vision, heard whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. His dreams, when he did manage to drift off, were filled with images of the wijja board, the planchette spinning wildly, the name Azazel appearing in a swirling, blood-red script. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, the feeling of unseen eyes still upon him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him home from that mansion, something dark and malevolent. He tried to confide in Karen, to tell her about the Ouija board, the name, the chilling presence he felt everywhere he went, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain something so irrational, so impossible? He sounded crazy even to himself, so he kept it bottled up inside, the fear festering like a wound. The whispers started subtly, a faint murmur at the edge of his hearing, easily dismissed as the house settling or the wind whistling through the eaves. But they grew louder, more insistent. Harry would catch snippets of conversation, his name spoken in hushed, guttural tones. He'd spin around, heart racing, only to find himself alone. Then came the writing. He woke one morning to find a message scrawled across his bathroom mirror in what looked like blood-red paint. Azazel remembers. He scrubbed at it frantically, his hands shaking until it disappeared. He told himself it was a prank that one of the kid's friends must have snuck in during the night, but deep down a cold terror gripped his heart. He knew the truth. The messages became more frequent, more menacing. They appeared on the walls, the ceiling, even the refrigerator door. "You cannot hide. You are mine." The writing was jagged, uneven, as if scrawled by a child. But the message was clear. Azazel was watching, tormenting, playing with him like a cat with a mouse. His work began to suffer. He couldn't concentrate, couldn't focus on anything but the whispers, the messages, the constant feeling of dread that clung to him like a shroud. He became withdrawn, irritable, snapping at his colleagues and taking long, unexplained breaks. His boss, a kindly old man who had always treated Harry like a son, pulled him aside one afternoon, his face etched with concern. "Harry, you're not yourself. Is everything all right?" Karen noticed the change in Harry almost immediately. He was distant, preoccupied, his eyes constantly darting around the room as if expecting something to jump out at him. He'd flinch at the slightest sound, his whole body tense with anticipation. The easy banter they used to share over breakfast had been replaced by an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the clatter of silverware and the rustle of the newspaper. She tried to talk to him, to draw him out, but he'd just shrug her off, mumbling something about work being stressful. She knew he wasn't telling her everything. She'd found him one night standing in the backyard, staring up at the sky, his face pale and drawn in the moonlight. When she'd asked him what he was doing, he'd just stared at her blankly, as if he didn't recognize her. The messages on the walls terrified her. She tried to convince herself it was Harry, that he was sleepwalking and writing them in some sort of fugue state. But deep down, a primal fear told her that something was terribly wrong. She started sleeping with a kitchen knife under her pillow, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every howl of the wind. She confronted Harry about the messages, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "Harry, this isn't funny. You need to stop it. You're scaring the kids." But Harry just shook his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "It's not me, Karen. I swear it's not me." His words did little to comfort her. In fact, they only served to deepen her fear. Harry's world was shrinking. The whispers, the messages, the constant feeling of being watched had driven a wedge between him and everyone he loved. Karen was distant, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and suspicion. The kids, sensing their parents' unease, tiptoed around the house as if walking on eggshells. He was a stranger in his own home. He tried to seek help. He went to the doctor, complaining of insomnia, anxiety, hallucinations. The doctor, a kind but weary man with tired eyes, listened patiently, nodding sympathetically. He prescribed Harry a cocktail of anti-anxiety medication and sleeping pills, assuring him that everything would be all right. The pills did little to help. They couldn't silence the whispers, couldn't erase the messages, couldn't banish the feeling of dread that had become his constant companion. He went to the library, poring over ancient texts on demonology, searching for answers, for a way to break the curse that had befallen him. He tried everything he read, from burning sage to reciting incantations, but nothing worked. Azazel was relentless. His friends stopped calling, stopped inviting him out. They'd heard the rumors, seen the change in him. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. He was alone, trapped in a nightmare of his own making. His job was next. He was called into his boss's office one morning and handed a cardboard box filled with his belongings. "I'm sorry, Harry," his boss said. his voice heavy with regret. "We've tried to make it work, but—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Harry knew. He was a liability, a danger to himself and others. He was adrift, unmoored from everything that had once defined him. His life was unraveling thread by thread. The final blow came on a cold, grey morning. Harry woke to the sound of Karen's voice, sharp and cold as ice. "I can't do this anymore, Harry," she said, her words echoing in the emptiness of their bedroom. The room was bare, stripped of all warmth and familiarity. The walls, once adorned with family photos, now stood stark and accusing. It's over. Karen had taken the kids to her sister's. She couldn't bear to stay in the house a moment longer, couldn't bear to be near him. He'd become a monster in her eyes, his tormentor indistinguishable from the man she'd vowed to love. The divorce papers arrived a week later, the black and white text a stark reminder of his shattered life. He signed them without reading, his hand shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen. He was truly alone now. His wife, his children, his job, his friends, all gone, ripped away by the unseen hand of Azazel. The whispers were a constant torment now, echoing in the silence of his empty house. They taunted him, mocked him, reminded him of everything he'd lost. He wandered from room to room like a ghost, his reflection in the darkened windows a stranger to him. His once bright eyes were now dull and lifeless, his skin pallid and drawn. He barely ate, barely slept. The only sustenance he seemed to need was despair, and Azazel provided it in abundance. The physical manifestations began subtly. A scratch on his arm, a bruise on his leg, easily explained away as clumsiness or accidents. But the injuries became more frequent, more severe. Deep scratches raked across his back as if claws had dragged through his flesh. Bruises bloomed on his arms, his chest, his face, dark and ugly. He tried to hide the marks, to cover them with long sleeves and high collars, but they multiplied faster than he could conceal them. He was a walking canvas of pain, his body a testament to Azazel's growing power. He knew with a chilling certainty that Azazel was marking him, claiming him as his own. One morning he woke to find a searing pain in his left hand. He looked down and saw with a gasp of horror that the word Azazel had been burned into his flesh. The letters were crude, formed by a series of blistering welts, but unmistakable. It was a brand, a mark of ownership. He was Azazel's body and soul. His cries of pain echoed through the empty house, unanswered, unheeded. He stumbled to the bathroom, clutching his burning hand, and stared at his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him was a stranger. His eyes were wild, his hair matted, his face contorted in a mask of pain and terror. He looked like a wild animal, hunted, broken. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. He saw shadows move in the corners of his vision, heard voices whispering his name in the dead of night. Objects moved on their own, doors slamming shut, lights flickering, the television bursting to life in a cacophony of static. He was living in a waking nightmare, haunted by an entity he couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't escape. The whispers became a constant torment, a chorus of voices taunting him, mocking him, urging him towards the precipice of madness. They told him he was worthless, that he deserved his fate, that there was no escape from the darkness that had consumed him. Sleep, when it came, offered no respite. His dreams were vivid, terrifying, filled with images of fire and brimstone, of demonic figures with glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth. He'd wake up screaming, his heart pounding, his sheets soaked in sweat. He was losing his grip on sanity, the abyss staring back at him with chilling familiarity. He considered ending it all. The thought of escaping the torment, of finding peace in oblivion, was a constant temptation, but even in his despair, a flicker of fear kept him tethered to this world. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that death would be no escape from Azazel. If anything, it would only tighten the demon's grip on his soul. One night, as Harry sat huddled in the darkness of his living room, surrounded by the remnants of his shattered life, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He flinched, his entire body tensing in anticipation of the pain, the terror. But this was different. This was something colder, more ancient, more evil. He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest, and came face to face with Azazel. The demon stood before him, its eyes burning with a cold, malevolent glee. It wasn't the monstrous creature of his nightmares, all fangs and claws and sulphurous breath. It was far more insidious. It wore the face of a friend, a confidant, someone he could almost trust. But the eyes betrayed its true nature. They were pits of darkness reflecting an eternity of suffering and cruelty. "You cannot escape me, Harry," Azazel whispered, its voice a chilling caress that sent shivers down his spine. "You are mine. You have always been mine." Harry tried to speak, to scream, to fight back, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed, his body frozen in place by a terror so profound it defied description. "This is only the beginning, Harry," Azazel continued, its lips curling into a cruel smile that revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. "I will break you. I will shatter you. And when you are nothing but a hollow shell, a vessel for my will, then, and only then, will your torment end." And with a final chilling laugh, Azazel vanished, leaving Harry alone in the darkness, his mind teetering on the brink of madness, his soul forever forfeit. Azazel's words hung in the air, a suffocating shroud of despair. Harry wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice, the sheer horror of it all. But all that emerged was a strangled sob, lost in the cavernous emptiness of the mansion. His life, once filled with promise and warmth, had been reduced to this, a cold, echoing tomb, haunted by his own folly. He looked around the room at the overturned furniture, the shattered lamps, the walls defaced with his own frantic scrawls. It was a testament to his descent into madness, a physical manifestation of the torment that gnawed at his soul. He had been so sure he could control it, contain it, but Azazel, like a venomous serpent, had slithered its way into his life, poisoning every aspect of his being. He remembered the laughter, the camaraderie of that night at Blackwood Manor, a night that had seemed at the time like a much-needed escape from the mundanity of his life. How naive he had been, how arrogantly he had tempted fate, inviting the darkness into his heart with a flick of the planchette. Now the laughter was gone, replaced by a silence so profound it was deafening. His friends, his colleagues, even his own family, they had all fled from the contagion of his despair. He was an island, adrift in a sea of shadows, the wreckage of his life bobbing around him like flotsam. The mansion, once a symbol of his friend's newfound fortune, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on him with each passing moment. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a tangible manifestation of the rot that had set in deep within his soul. He was trapped, bound to this place, this torment for all eternity. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams, once filled with mundane anxieties and fleeting joys, were now a waking nightmare. He saw Karen's face, contorted in fear and disgust, her voice a chilling echo accusing him of madness, of cruelty. He saw his children's eyes, wide with terror, their laughter replaced by a silence that cut him to the core. He tried to pray, to find solace in the rituals of his childhood faith, but the words felt hollow, meaningless in the face of the overwhelming darkness that had engulfed him. The God he had once believed in, the God of love and mercy, seemed distant, indifferent to his plight. He was alone, adrift in a sea of despair, the shores of sanity receding with each passing moment. He had become a creature of the shadows, a hollow shell animated by fear and pain. This was the price of his folly, the bitter fruit of his hubris. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he would hear them, whispers of laughter, faint and ephemeral like the rustling of leaves in a long-dead forest. They seemed to come from the walls, from the very air itself, mocking him with the memory of what he had lost. He would wander through the darkened halls of the mansion, his footsteps echoing on the bare wooden floors, searching for the source of the laughter. He knew it was Azazel, toying with him, reminding him of the life he had once known, the happiness he had so carelessly discarded. He remembered family gatherings, the warmth of Karen's hand in his, the infectious laughter of his children. He remembered the simple joys of a life lived in the light, a life free from the suffocating grip of fear. But those memories were like faded photographs, their colors bleached by time and despair. They offered him no comfort, only a profound sense of loss, a constant reminder of the paradise he had forfeited. As the days bled into weeks and the weeks into months, Harry surrendered to the darkness. He no longer fought the whispers, the shadows, the chilling certainty that he was irrevocably damned. He was Azazel's plaything now, a puppet dancing to the strings of his tormentor's will. The mansion became his world, its decaying grandeur a fitting backdrop to his own internal ruin. He wandered its halls like a wraith, his body a living tomb, his mind a shattered mirror reflecting the fragments of his shattered life. He no longer knew if it was day or night, if time still held any meaning within the confines of his eternal prison. The world outside, with its bustling cities and mundane concerns, seemed as distant and unreal as a half-remembered dream. He was lost, adrift in an endless night of his own making, the echoes of his laughter a constant reminder of the light he had extinguished. And in the depths of his despair, he found a terrible kind of peace. The peace of utter surrender, the acceptance of his fate as a prisoner of his own making, forever bound to Azazel's side in an eternal dance of damnation. The party, it seemed, would never end.